Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this week's Glue42 webinar. The title this week is Building Simplified and Traceable Desktop Experiences. Today I'm joined by Andrew Davey, Solutions Consulting Director, also Erjan Gavalji, Pre-Sales Consultant, and I'm James Worcester, the COO. So let's begin with a screenshot of something that we love to see and you probably hate to see, which is a messy desktop. If you look closely at the image, you'll see that there are a variety of applications, including Excel, which is a desktop installation, Salesforce.com running in a browser, Chrome, I think, and then a bunch of in-house applications written in Java, .NET, Silverlight, JavaScript as well, and plus the fact there is also Bloomberg for good measure. Now, if you're an end user, and your job function requires these applications to, well, first of all, be found, then launched, and then for each of those applications to show a different view of the same data object, be that a client or a portfolio, then there's a lot of work involved in making sure that you're looking at the right data at the right time. The copying and pasting that goes on between these applications is also a cause of downstream errors, particularly when you've copied and pasted the wrong thing. From an operational perspective, there are issues with this kind of desktop. First and foremost, the fact is that whilst an end user is doing desktop application integration, they're not actually doing their job function. So handling times are going to be extended, error rates are going to be higher, and there's a risk of compromising the outcomes that your end users, be those traders or financial advisors, will perform. From an IT perspective, this is actually hideously complex because the applications, certainly those in-house applications, simply can't talk to each other directly because they're written in different languages. But also some of the other applications either do or don't have APIs. And worse still, some are installed on the client only where there is no server-side component at all. So in that sense, desktop application integration has to be done primarily on the desktop, but also with the ability to hook up to server-side components as and when required. So there must be a better way. So before I move on to the next slide, where I'll talk about a solution that we can provide for this problem, I just want to introduce this chap here. Prizes awarded for anyone who can recognise the photo. So this chap has been quoted as saying, "Simplicity is a great virtue, but it requires hard work to achieve it and education to appreciate it. And to make matters worse, complexity sells better." Well, this guy is, shall reveal right now, Edgar Dijkstra, and I first came across this person probably in the late 1980s as part of a computer science education. Mr. Dijkstra won the Turing Award in 1972 and is probably often acknowledged as being the father of structured programming. What he says is absolutely correct. In order to give an end user a simplified working environment in which the applications do not present barriers but simply provide a means by which they can deliver the outcomes they're being paid for, that's a non-trivial problem to solve. And so for us at Glue42, if we can get an end user to look at our new desktop environment and go, well, that looks easy, that's just one application, isn't it? Oh, hang on, it looks like multiple apps, then that would be a great result. So here's the kind of thing that I mean. What you can see in the little video clip is what we call a workspace. And a workspace comprises one or multiple of your original applications. We don't care what those application technology types were, and indeed we can host applications which are both locally installed and remotely deployed within the same workspace. And just squinting closely, I can see Salesforce and I can also see Bloomberg cooperating within the same workspace, as well as .NET, JavaScript and so on. So a workspace then is a means by which you can create a task-oriented environment for a user to perform their job function. So a user's perspective of a workspace is, well, that's great, that's intuitive. I know which are the applications I need to use. But better still, Glue42 provides not just UI integration, but also data integration. So selecting a client, for example, in one application will automatically and in real time trigger an update in all of the other applications to show the same client. From an operations perspective, this means that there is no copy and paste. The user is not doing swivel chair integration, and the chances are that operational metrics and KPIs will be improved. Now, that perhaps sounds a little bit like clock watching what a trader does, but of course I mean much more than time spent. I mean, if you offer the right application at the right time, then the chances are that the business outcome will be better because their level of insight and their level of data awareness is going to be improved. From an IT perspective, what Glue42 does is treats all applications as being equal. We really don't care whether the application is Java, JavaScript, .NET, VB, COM, whatever it happens to be. Our platform is blind to the technology, and so whatever you can do with one technology stack, you can do with the other. Finally, from a business perspective, if you can start to lay out just the right applications at just the right time, then you can begin to exert some influence over the process that the user follows. And to some extent, you can remove the opportunity for errors and make sure that procedures are correctly adopted and that regulatory rules are abided by. The final thing I want to just make clear on this particular slide is that this is a single workspace. If you look really closely top left, within this rectangular region, you can also have other workspaces as well that relate to other tasks that this user may perform. And obviously workspaces can be gathered together on one or multiple physical screens. So that in a nutshell is the kind of solution that we would seek to provide. Now before I move on, there's one thing that I hope is not obvious to you when looking at that little video clip. And that is that depending upon the configuration that you've chosen for your Glue42 desktop, what you can do, if you so wish, is to capture events that relate to the user's journey, both within and between the applications. Now I want to stress this is absolutely configurable. So let's have a look at the next slide. So User Behavior Analytics, or UBA as we call it. UBA is this concept which relates to selective monitoring and recording of user activity for either real-time or subsequent historic analysis. So the way this works with Glue42 is that every time you open or close a Glue-enabled application, every time you give it focus or move it, drag it, drop it, we will capture an event that relates to the exact time when that gesture occurred and also the user's ID and so on. Now, if you ask us very kindly, we can also provide a version of Glue42 that will record keystrokes and mouse click events. I want to stress that's not available within the default build of Glue42. You have to ask us for that. There's no charge for it, but you just have to ask us for it because clearly there are security implications if you turn on those features. So let's just consider UBA in a bit more detail. So what Glue42 does is to harvest the events as and when they occur, correlate those events to a time of day and an end user, store them in some form of data lake. We don't provide the data lake. Normally our clients provide that for us. But what we do is ensure that there is no message loss, even when you're capturing events from tens of thousands of end users at the same time. When the events are dumped into the data lake, or indeed just prior to them being stored, we will consolidate and filter those events to remove any obvious bits of noise or duplicates. Finally, and you'll see this a little bit later on, you can then visualize those events and then produce some kind of business insight from those events in terms of the user's behaviour and the outcomes that have been delivered. And then, like all diagrams of this kind, there's a virtuous feedback loop as well. So, if we capture the events that are shown on the diagram, then what that means is that we can address and answer some simple operational queries with that raw data. So, for example, we know when an application was launched and indeed was closed. So we know what the most frequently used application was. And actually, better still, we know within a particular time bucket as well, within a 1 minute interval, a 5 minute, 10 minute, an hour, or a day interval, which is the most frequently used application. Now, use does not always imply focus. Sometimes you could be looking at an application, but perhaps slightly obscuring that application on the same screen or a different physical screen is the one that's capturing the keystrokes. In other words, the application with focus. So we can distinguish between those two kinds of application usage. The next thing is that we know everything about the user in terms of their session. So when did they log in? When did they log out? How much activity is occurring in terms of user gestures, either through the mouse or through the keyboard. And then there's a bunch of infrastructure queries that we also help address. So we know the CPU memory and network utilization on any machine that's got Glue42 deployed. Now, those queries in themselves can be reasonably useful, particularly from an operations perspective. But these are what we call primitive queries or primitive events. And where I want to get to is on this next slide, which talks about some higher order queries that can be addressed by looking at combinations of those primitive events and some value-add components that we at Glue42 can provide. So, for example, if you happen to know that in a trading desk, Fred is the best trader because Fred delivers the best outcomes for the business, then the next immediate question is, well, what's Fred doing that others are not? Now, you can answer that question in any number of ways, but one starting point is to look at the applications that Fred is using, the time that Fred spends in those applications and the sequence of his journey backwards and forwards through those apps. If you know what Fred does, then you can build that into your future training programs and then start to upskill everyone else. The next one is about application modernization. So we often go into customers' sites and they go, right, we want to use Glue42 and we're going to start there, pointing to some legacy application typically. And our first question that we enjoy asking is why? Why do you want to start and integrate that application? Why didn't you choose some other application? And they go, well, yeah, it's used most frequently, and it's key to many of the user processes. Now, they might be right. The fact is, where are they getting their evidence of usage from? Well, if you wanted, you can deploy the UBA components within Glue42 before you actually start an integration project. So you can actually build hard evidence to build a business case for integration and operational change. Now, the other thing that we have seen UBA being used for is to decide how long a particular process journey is taking, and then to look for opportunities to reduce the journey time. And so with the raw events, what we can determine is the steps and the interactions within an application and start to look for areas of duplication or unnecessary steps that occur in order that you can start thinking about what the new integrated desktop could look like. Finally, if you have documented your internal processes so you understand which data sources should be looked at in order that a trade is placed for best execution purposes, for example, then capturing the events from the user will help you understand whether procedures are being followed. And also, there is a new feature that's being added into our product and will be available at the end of next month, I believe, which is screenshotting. So we can, based upon milestones that the developer chooses, take a screenshot of the desktop or desktops that the user is looking at and record those into the very same data store that the events are destined for. That would subsequently allow a risk and compliance officer to have a very complete view about the activities that were performed, for example, pre and post trade. Now, I'm not suggesting this is done as a matter of course, and really it's for the risk and compliance officers to decide whether they want to switch on or off this feature. Again, I just want to labour the point that capturing keystrokes and capturing mouse clicks is an extra that you would need us to switch on as part of the deployment of your particular Glue42 package. So all of that UBA stuff, I hope, explains how you can gain some business insight using Glue42. Now, what I propose to do now, assuming the technology works, is hand over to Andrew Davey, who has got a different laptop, and we will share his screen and we will go through a demonstration of everything that I've just spoken about. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, James. I'm now going to take you through a use case for metrics where we're going to show how Glue42 can integrate with any application, how we can measure best practice, and then how we can increase productivity. The Glue42 platforms used for this use case are going to be the metric store, the configuration services for changing the layout. We're going to connect to Salesforce using the Salesforce connector. We're going to have the Glue42 gateway that's going to bring everything together. We're going to see interop where applications will be sharing context, and all displayed within inside of Swimlane UI, and some in-house applications written in JavaScript. So what is the use case? So our process is going to be a user working down a work list and actioning the next item on that work list. They're going to review the task, what do they need to do within that item. They're then going to retrieve the contact details of the customer so they can give them a call. And then finally they're going to review the portfolio with the customer. Currently, they do that with using an in-house built client list, a client contact application that actually we're looking to replace with Salesforce, because Salesforce already has the contact details, but we want the task details also used from Salesforce. So we're just going to migrate, in fact, a screen at a time. We're then going to review the portfolio using the Portfolio app and Portfolio Preview. Afterwards, we're going to replace that. You'll see that client list still remains, but Salesforce will now do all the functionality of client contact as well as retrieving those contact details. Meanwhile, Portfolio and Portfolio Preview will still remain there. At the center is the Glue42 desktop, and that's going to be using our task management workspace within the swim lane. Every interaction with the desktop is going to be pushed out to the metric store. Within our workspace, we're going to have our in-house client list, Salesforce SaaS application, client contact that's going to be removed, and also the portfolio and portfolio preview. Finally, ClickSense is going to be used to analyze the information inside the metric store, but you can use your own enterprise standard tooling of choice. I'm inside ClickSense desktop, and what you can see here is a very simple set of visualizations of the Glue42 metrics that are captured. I can see app usage on the 9th of October. I can see how often the apps are being used, and we can see that client contact, our legacy application, is used quite heavily at the moment. I can see app usage by user, and then a breakdown of percentages of app usage. By itself, probably not that much use, because what I can't understand from this is the user workflow. What was the order in which the applications were accessed by a user? Glue42 metrics allows me to get that visualization. If I look at 10:05, I can see that there's a lot of activity, but I want it broken down by user. So let's see what Fred was doing at this time. I can see Fred's every interaction with the desktop down to the millisecond. I can see he starts with client list. He then looks at the client contact to see what task he has to do. Then goes into Salesforce to get the contact information. When contacting the customer, he then goes into client portfolio and then finally does a preview. But how does that compare and contrast against other users? Well, Glue42 allows me to have that insight. Here I can see the user journey. I can see that Amber, Boris, Charlie, Daphne, Erica and Fred pretty much have the same user journey every time. They start with client list, they go and look at contact to see what tasks they've got to do, They move into Salesforce to get that contact information, and then they look at the client portfolio and portfolio preview with the client. What I can see from Gavin is actually he has a slightly more complex user journey. He seems to have a lot of times clicking between client contact and Salesforce. So maybe there's an opportunity there for some training to make sure that he falls in line with everyone else. But what we're interested in now is actually this legacy migration. We're removing the client contact app because all the information the user needs is in Salesforce. So let's see what happens now this has been released and what is that user journey. We're now inside swim lane within Glue42. This is the workspace within that swim lane for task management. On the left hand side you can see the client list with a list of clients that I'm working down throughout the day. In the middle at the top you can see client contact. This is where previously I would have my to-do list for that client and action from there. But we've now migrated all that into Salesforce so I can access everything inside the application relating to tasks and also contact details, streamlining the workflow. On the right hand side you can see I've got a tab for client portfolio and another tab for portfolio preview. So as I select any ticker within that client portfolio, it'll display it in portfolio preview screen. So let's now action my first client of the day, Vernon Mullen. As soon as I select Vernon Mullen, you can see every application synchronizes to the right screen to action that request. Whether it's internal, a JavaScript, .NET, any kind of application, or whether it's a third-party application via APIs or SaaS application, they will all synchronize to the right screen for Vernon. Well, I don't need to look at client contact, so I'm going to bypass that and go straight into Salesforce. I want to understand what is the task I need to undertake for Vernon Mullen. So click on my task, and it displays Vernon Mullen's details. Click on Vernon, and now I've got all the information I need to deal with that request and give him a call. So it's time for his quarterly check-in. So as I call Vernon now, I look at his portfolio on the right hand side, and when I select any ticker within there, automatically in the background context is shared with the portfolio preview, which is displaying the right information for that client. So now we've decided that, okay, we've optimized the flow. Let's see what this looks like in the analytics, comparing to how people used to operate previously. Let's load the latest data into ClickSense. Tim has been trialing this new version for us, and we can see that when he goes from client list, he bypasses client contact because he's got everything he needs in Salesforce. Then he goes to the client portfolio and portfolio preview. So actually we can see that we no longer need the client contact app. So what do we do with this information? Well, we don't want people using client contact when they don't need to. So what we can do is optimize the workspace and remove client contact there for every other user. So we've removed client contact from this workspace. We can now save that. And we can now go ahead as part of role management and push that out to everyone else in this role so they no longer see that obsolete application. With that, and keeping an eye on that metrics, we can safely remove that application in the near future. The power of the Glue42 platform means that you can integrate all your legacy applications with the latest technology, meaning you don't have to rewrite if there's no business value. Whether it's written in the latest technology JavaScript, or whether you're still using Java, .NET or any other language, those applications can behave as a single coherent application for the end user. And when I do want to migrate to new technologies such as Salesforce, I don't have to move everything at once. I can migrate a screen at a time and understand how people are using those applications to focus on the ones that give the most business value. Once we've migrated, then are they using them in the right way? How are people interacting with those apps? How do my best people use the technology? And learning from that, optimizing my workspaces continually without needing input from IT. Where do our customers get the value out of metrics? We've already seen business workflows, how I can optimize them without needing to go back to IT. I can change the order in which applications are displayed and ensure the adherence across all my users, and continually learn how they're interacting and continually improving those workflows. Champion Challenger. I've got a new version of application. I don't want to push it out to everyone. I want to push it out to a small number of people who are my experts. and then I can contrast and compare how they're performing to other people in the organisation. Is it making a difference? Should I roll it out? Or actually, should I roll back? So adopting a fail fast, learn fast approach. App usage. I've seen examples where an application has been deployed and we've seen that no one's actually using the application. Maybe it doesn't do exactly what they want. Maybe they don't even know it exists. But understanding that and then marketing internally to say what this app does and why it's going to make your job better. Fraud prevention was something that we didn't actually think about as part of the product. It was amazing when one of our customers came to us and they employ a team of data scientists who actually looked at models where they could predict fraud before it was happening, therefore reducing their risk and exposure. And finally, return on investment. So looking at how applications are used in workflows and using that input into models to make sure that you're investing in the right areas, in the right applications that will help drive your business forward. Why Glue42? Glue42 allows you to integrate any application on the desktop, irrespective of what language it's written in, whether it's Java, .NET or JavaScript, whether it's a legacy application or the latest modern SaaS application. From a user perspective, every single application behaves as though it is a single application on the desktop. You could also measure best practice to understand how those users are interacting with the desktop. What is the flow of application they use? How can we keep looking at those processes and improving them using fail fast, learn fast techniques with Champion Challenger? And all this leads to an increase in productivity, continue driving revenue growth within the business. And with that, I'll now hand over to Ercan, who'll take any of your questions. Ercan?